access this webinar, and we'll be sharing slides as well, so you'll be able to access those slides. So don't worry too much about taking lots of notes. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to start. So Khadija, if you don't mind admitting everyone in the meeting room, thanks. All right, so welcome everyone to the SDG Teach In webinar introduction, specifically how to take part in the 2022 SDG Teach In. So my name is Sonia Perez, and I am a senior project manager at SOS-UK, and I'll introduce SOS-UK in just a moment. And so this webinar is going to last around an hour. As I had mentioned, it is recorded, so don't worry too much about taking notes. Slides will also be shared with everyone in attendance and shared publicly as well. So it's a big group of us today. There's nearly 150 people registered to attend, and so I think people will be coming in and out. Please make use of the chat box to share any questions, comments, resources. Please do feel free to interact with one another as well. I do want this to be a space where you might be able to connect with educators or students or other individuals interested in similar areas of sustainability and learning. I will also ask for you to please keep your microphone on mute. As I'm sure we're all aware, it's been over 2 years now of Zoom webinars, and background noise can make it difficult at times for colleagues to hear. So please do keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. So the agenda for the next hour is an introduction to the SDG Teach In. What is it exactly? What are we hoping to achieve? Then we'll be exploring the SDGs. What exactly are the SDGs? Why are they so beneficial in thinking about education and thinking about creating a more sustainable and just world? And then we'll be discussing the impact of the previous 2021 SDG Teach In. So I'll be sharing just some stats, some of the outcomes from the Teach In, just so you can get some inspiration and learn learn about this ongoing annual international campaign. Then we'll cover what we need to do to actually take part in the SDG Teach In, and we'll go through some tips that you might find helpful in terms of actually thinking about embedding or incorporating the SDGs in your work. And then next step. So what else do you need to do after this to pledge and take part? Brilliant. And there's there'll also be time at the end rather to share what you might want to do for the SDG Teach In or any questions you may have. So a brief introduction to SOS-UK. So we are a education and sustainability charity developed by the National Union of Students, essentially to go further and faster with absolutely crucial and transformative sustainability work. And our theory of change essentially is to get more students and individuals in general leading on and learning about sustainability. So we want to see sustainability embedded in all types of education, whether that's in nurseries, primary or secondary schools, universities. We want to see it in extracurricular volunteering, workplace learning. We just want to make sure that sustainability is embedded in any kind of learning and in lifelong learning as well. So we are a student-led organization, and a lot of our work is with students in universities and colleges. But we also have a strong focus on sustainability in wider communities. So we work with NHS trusts in the UK, housing associations, other charities, local councils, and museums even. So our ethos or our thinking really is that education does not finish at graduation or when any individual leaves school. It's a lifelong learning, and it's a hugely important part of education for sustainable development and for embedding sustainability and for realizing a sustainable world. So what is the SDG Teach In? So the SDG Teach In is an international annual campaign launched by SOS-UK, Students Organising for Sustainability, in 2018. So this year, the campaign will be in its 5th year, which is really amazing. And every year we have seen it grow and progress. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So as I had mentioned, our theory of change at SOS-UK is that education is formative in creating a more just and sustainable future. It plays such a key role in realizing climate justice and sustainability. And so we want to see more students and individuals learning about and leading on sustainability, and how and what they learn in formal education and otherwise will absolutely impact this. So we can create change at all levels, here and now, through education. And so using our campuses or our places of work as demonstrations of what a society can be can really harness the power of students and staff and other individuals to create positive change. And so you might have noticed when I talk about education in terms of the SDG Teach In, I'm not just talking about formal education. So we want the SDG Teach In to go beyond formal education, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And we want to also include informal education. And I've actually already seen a few educators in informal spaces pledged to take part in the Teach In. So that might be, you know, people who are involved in continual professional development, or individuals who provide training for volunteers to work in sustainability. There really are so many different types of or spheres of education, and we want everyone in any kind of sphere of education to get involved in the campaign. And we'll sort of explore those different spheres in a moment. And I just want to add as well, sorry, just going back, that the SDG Teach In is a really great entry point to engaging with sustainability. It's really accessible. You know, you don't have to redesign your entire curriculum. You don't have to go through loops with SOS-UK. It's not bureaucratic. So if you haven't previously engaged with sustainability, or if you're a bit, you know, if you're stretched for capacity, it's still really doable, and it's very much accessible. And we'll talk about what that means and what that looks like. So aside from our work at SOS-UK, as you know, really believing that education plays a principal role in realizing a sustainable world, we also deliver campaigns like the SDG Teach In because students are telling us that that's what they want. So for the past 10 years, we've been doing research with students in universities and colleges in the UK and in primary and secondary schools. And we found that you know, students want to learn about sustainable development. They want to see their institutions actively incorporate sustainable development in all their courses. And they say that their place of study should, you know, consider and actively incorporate sustainable development. And also in 2021, our school survey, we found through our school survey that 71% of pupils surveyed are interested in learning more about the environment. 85% of pupils agree that all schools and colleges should be doing more to help the environment, and 84% of pupils surveyed agree that all schools and colleges should be encouraging and helping pupils to do things to help the environment. So there is that, you know, that desire and that need and want from students and pupils. So this is research from the UK, but Khadija, I think, will be putting in the chat the links to our research. So do take a look at that in case it is helpful. Okay, great. So I've just sort of explored SOS-UK, talked a bit about the SDG Teach In. Now I want to delve a bit deeper into the SDGs and talk about how they are a tool to thinking about sustainability and thinking about sustainability in learning in particular. So what are the SDGs? So the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs are much less of a mouthful, are a set of goals that outline a broad set of international objectives for creating a just and sustainable future for all. So they were agreed upon by all United Nations member states in 2015. And what they do is they set out the sustainability agenda from 2015 to 2030. So the 17 goals are underpinned by 169 specific targets and 232 measurable indicators. And these targets and indicators really sort of provide more context, provide, I guess, smaller steps to achieving these bigger goals. And that's, you know, a really important area to look at that can be useful for your work embedding the goals into your teaching and learning. So I think what's amazing about the SDGs is that they show the breadth of sustainability. They show that sustainability isn't just about the environment, but it really encompasses the social and the environmental and the economic. And there's so many different areas that need to be considered to achieve a sustainable world. And so from these 17 SDGs, you really can see the different types of challenges and the different types of goals that we must make in order to achieve a sustainable world. Another amazing thing about the SDGs is that they're interconnected. So these goals are very much, they impact one another. I think I really like this visual because it's quite physical. If you think about pulling one of the strings, the other SDGs might move. And so in that way, you can kind of see, if you make progress on one SDG, that progress will impact another SDG. And so when you think about your teaching, your learning, or any kind of work that you might want to incorporate the SDGs in, you'll most likely make progress on more than one SDG because of this interconnected nature of the SDGs. So an example is, just to go back to the graph. So yeah, quality education and gender equality, goals 4 and 5. Oftentimes we see gender equality impacted by perhaps the lack of access to quality education that girls and women might face. So progress on quality education impacts gender equality and vice versa. And there's so many other different examples of that when you really look at the SDGs in depth. So I'd like to ask everyone in the chat, how do you connect with the goals? So choose a goal that resonates with you, whether that's for a personal reason, an area of study, your discipline, your research, your work. And why did you choose that goal? Why does it matter to you? And the purpose of that is to really show that in the breadth of the SDGs, there really is something for everyone. And when we think about our teaching and learning, when we think about our work, what you're teaching and what you're learning and what you're assessing will absolutely connect with at least one of the goals. So, yeah, let me know what goals resonate with you. I think for me personally, I very much resonate with goal number 2, which is no hunger. I grew up with a very strong food culture, and food is a very big part of my life. And so thinking about world hunger and how people might be impacted or not have access to the same kind of warmth and comfort that I had, makes me feel very strongly about that goal. Yeah, so anyone else, please have a think and share your thoughts in the chat box. So 1 and 5, yeah, someone said all of them, of course, like all, because again, they're so interconnected. So if you do feel like you resonate with one goal, most likely you resonate rather with multiple goals, because they're so connected and they impact one another. Yeah, there's lots of, so some people are coming in with saying, this goal is a priority for us at your school or your place of work, definitely. And so we really can connect with the goals on such a personal level and a professional level. And sometimes, of course, those levels kind of overlap. Yeah. Yeah, reducing inequalities is definitely an important one for me as well. I'm really passionate about social justice. Yeah, so the social and structural determinants of health, goal 3, and not just for humans, but for all other types of life as well, certainly. Yeah, so I'm really just asking you this for you to think about what the goals mean to you, and to see that, see the breadth of the SDGs and how they really touch upon every kind of area of life and every kind of, economic, environmental, and social aspect of the sustainability or the climate crisis. Brilliant. Great. So yeah, please feel free to keep sharing your thoughts in the chat box, really thinking about what bits of these goals resonate with you. And for some of you, that might be the first step to taking part in the SDG Teach In, really thinking about which of these goals resonate with me. And that could be, again, personal on a personal level, but also a professional or academic level as well. So why the SDGs? Why are we, planning this campaign around the Sustainable Development Goals? What is so special about them, essentially? So the SDGs demonstrate the links between social, environmental, and economic challenges, and they serve as an effective conversation starter, essentially, sort of moving away from this idea that the climate crisis and sustainability is just about the environment and soils and greenhouse gases, but it's about so much more. It's about health and well-being, and it's about, you know, reducing poverty, eliminating poverty, and all sorts of other challenges. And yeah, because they're so broad, they can help you identify how sustainability is related to your interests and your studies. And again, I think what's really impressive about the SDGs is that it's a shared language now. So we've had the SDGs since 2015. That's 7 years now. And the SDGs are used in every sector. You can find all sorts of sectors utilizing the SDGs and, you know, planning their strategies with the SDGs in mind, or you know, planning goals with the SDGs in mind. It's very much this shared language that the world is using, people across the globe are using, and through that, you know, you can really communicate your goals and your plans and your interests quite interestingly and nicely. So I really like that shared language aspect of the SDGs. Another thing about the SDGs is that it's important to engage critically with the SDGs. So when we're working with the SDGs, especially with a campaign like the SDG Teach In, it's important to think about what's been left out in the SDGs. What type of future will these SDGs create? How does my discipline or my work or my learning progress the SDGs? How does it impact the SDGs? You know, are there things I can do to increase that impact? Are there things I can do to perhaps lessen that impact if it's negative as well? So it's really important not just to use the SDGs for what they are, but to think more critically about that. And someone in the chat has said, yeah, I wonder how compatible economic growth is with climate action. Absolutely, and that's a question that, you know, we've been talking about for I've been talking about that in other workshops I've facilitated, definitely. And that's why it's so important, again, to think back to the way progress on one SDG might impact another SDG, and at times that might be a negative impact as well. So it is really good to engage critically with the SDGs. You know, the SDGs aren't the end all and be all of sustainability, but they are an excellent starting point and an excellent shared language. So really do take from them what you will. And I think it's an excellent way to start thinking about embedding sustainability in your teaching, learning, and your work. And so the last point is, yeah, the 17 goals alone will likely not go far enough to create a better future for all. You know, there's bits in the SDGs, perhaps racism, other types of oppression that aren't really reflected. However, we hope that through the SDG Teach In, educators and learners will be able to identify how you contribute to solving some of the world's greatest challenges. So it really is that starting off point. Okay, so the 2021 SDG Teach In. So as I had mentioned, this is the 5th year of the SDG Teach In campaign. It started in 2018. Gosh, time really flies. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the last year's campaign, just so you can kind of gauge what's happened. So the 2021 campaign saw the highest number of educators taking part since 2018, since its first year. It also saw the highest number of students reached and the highest number of institutions taking part since the campaign's inception. So last year, 496 educators pledged to incorporate the global goals into teaching and learning. They altogether reached nearly 50,000 students and learners through lessons, workshops, tutorials, a whole range of different learning activities. And in total, 48 educational institutions took part. And in 2018, 27 institutions took part, 184 teaching staff took part, and it reached nearly 12,000 students. So you can really see the growth in the campaign, and I guess the growth in interest and in urgency and in desire to really think about sustainability in education. So it's amazing to think about the progress from 2018. Another thing I want to highlight is last year as well, you know, students' unions took part, which was really great. And we saw different kinds of educators take part. For the most part, it was formal education. We didn't really get a lot of workplace learning and training in part, but we really recognize how important workplace learning and other kinds of education is. And so we very much encourage any kind of educator who's not in formal education to take part as well. So every year during the Teach In, we have leaderboards, and the leaderboards are essentially a way to celebrate institutions who have reached a high number, the highest percentage of their students by the campaign, or who have had lots of different educators from their institution pledge to take part in the SDG Teach In. And last year, the University of Exeter placed highest for both leaderboards, with 96 educators pledging to take part and reaching almost 41% of their student body, which is amazing. And Glasgow Caledonian was second for that. And so again, we see universities mostly in the leaderboard, but that's not at all to say that informal educators or training workshops from organizations or charities can't get on the leaderboard, because that's absolutely, we would love to see that. And so yeah, the leaderboard is really to celebrate the amazing work done by institutions in embedding sustainability in learning and in education, and to also add a bit of friendly competition to make things fun and keep us on our toes a bit as well. And so I will share more information about how you can work with your colleagues to get on the leaderboard. So I'm going to go through a couple of case studies from last year's Teach In, just to maybe get you all thinking, maybe inspire you a bit. And these are examples from different types of education. So hopefully you can see the broad range of education we are hoping to include in the SDG Teach In. So the first one is a case study from Prestwick Academy in South Ayrshire. This was their higher Spanish class. So essentially what they did during the SDG Teach In last year was they enabled students to make connections with different people and their culture and play a fuller part as global citizens. So in learning Spanish, students watched a documentary about the Barefoot Foundation in Colombia, which focuses on education, inequalities, and food production and distribution. Students were tasked with producing a short essay or presentation in Spanish to talk about the work of the Barefoot Foundation and links with the SDGs, as well as reflecting on whether the issues faced by children in Colombia are similar to those faced by young people in Scotland. So really brilliant example of how you can utilize a case study or a film to draw connections to the SDGs and to really think about sustainability and creating a fair world and what that means in a secondary school Spanish class. So amazing. Another case study is from the University of Exeter in their mathematics module, so mathematics for environment and sustainability. So they use group work projects to explore the potential and limitations of mathematical modeling, so scientific computing and data science tools for addressing key societal and technological challenges relating to environment and sustainability. So the module's three themes, titled Optimal Decision-Making for the Renewable Energy Economy, Social and Ecological Systems, and Infectious Diseases, mapped to a number of the SDGs. And essentially students were encouraged and are still encouraged to engage with the SDGs in their group work projects and associated assignments. And the SDGs are signposted in lectures and through the module's virtual learning environment as well. So an interesting example of how mathematics can be used and applied to contribute to sustainability, especially, yeah, the idea of renewable energy and how we can use maths there. And so below you can see the various SDGs that were touched upon or incorporated into this module. And again, we'll be sharing the slides and the recording of this video. So do not worry if you're unable to take notes. Another example is from Bournemouth University, so studying SMEs and entrepreneurial finance. So the course focused on marginalized groups and their inability to gain access to entrepreneurial finance. That's difficult to say for some reason right now. So students looked at goal number 5, which is gender equality, and how students view the problem, and they highlighted the issue from a global perspective. So they discussed gender bias in the context of traditional finance, looking through relevant literature and thinking about the presence of gender bias in venture capital markets. Students deliberated, so they had a discussion on the potential of crowdfunding to be democratizing access to finance, but also being aware of the research around this area of finance and the impacts. So essentially, again, taking a course like related to business and thinking, about how the SDGs are incorporated into that. And the SDGs that were embedded into the course are at the bottom of the screen. So you can see goal 5, 8, 9, and 10. Right, and the last example I'm going to use is from Keele University Students Union. And I'm really happy that, there's a really good case study from Students Union, because so much learning happens in students associations and students unions. Even though it might not be in the lecture theatre or in the classroom, there's still so much learning. So it's such an important area of education for students. So at Keele University Students Unions, an online workshop was held to work with the union's part-time officers to help them understand how the SDGs and how sustainability is directly linked to social justice and liberation. So policy was passed at the Keele Students Union Council, mandating that the Students Union embed the SDGs throughout events, campaigns, and activities. So the union wants future sustainability endeavors to meet the needs of liberation groups. The workshop introduced the SDGs as an accessible way of understanding the breadth of sustainability, especially for those who haven't formally studied sustainability, and how previous work that the SU has done could be improved by thinking about the SDGs. So again, you can see the various SDGs that were embedded into this event at the bottom of the screen. And so those are just 4 examples of activities or examples of how the SDGs were embedded into learning that happened last year. So my colleague Khadija has put in the chat a link to the report from last year, and you can read even more case studies if you're looking for even more examples, or if you're looking for more inspiration. And there's so many other things I can think of. So recently I worked with an art school to work with graphic design students who were given the prompt of how can we support our peers to eat less meat. And so that way the graphic design students were able to hone their graphic design skills while also thinking really critically about the meat industry and about our diets and health and well-being and quality education and all sorts of SDGs. So that's just another example of embedding the SDGs in learning and teaching. And if you're looking for more examples as well, or if you have really good examples, please feel free to share any in the chat box or any links that you might have as well. I do want this to be a sharing space to help everyone get involved in the teaching. Awesome. So now let's talk about how to take part in the 2022 SDG Teach In. So what do we need to do now? And this is for educators. And again, educators of all kinds. So not necessarily educators in formal educational institutions, but all sorts of educators. So the first step is to pledge to take part in the 2022 SDG Teach In. And we've already had quite a few pledges, nearly 100 from all sorts of educators all over the world. And it's just so nice to see already the reach that, or the impact that is going to be felt by students and learners across the world. And so after pledging to take part in the 2022 SDG Teach In, here are just some simple steps you can take to start thinking about how you can actually, embed or incorporate the SDGs in your work. So consider what SDGs are relevant to your work. So that question again, what resonates, what's relevant, what can your work actually, what SDGs can your work actually progress and support? Then have a think about the different activities in teaching, learning, and assessments that will take place during the campaign. So the campaign is going to run for 2 weeks from February 21st to March 4th. So what's going to happen in those 2 weeks where you can sort of take a step back and try and embed the SDGs in any activities? So that might be homework assignments, it might be a group discussion, you might have an event that you want to put on. It really, there's a range of different things you can do, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then, yeah, once you have an idea of the SDGs that are relevant to your work, and once you have an idea of the different activities that will take place during the teach-in, during those 2 weeks, have a think about how you can embed the relevant SDGs into upcoming teaching, learning, and/or assessment activities. So just 3 really simple steps, or 4 if you include pledging to take part, to getting involved. Now for students. So we also very much encourage students to be really vocal about the SDG Teach In if you feel comfortable, because educators listen to students, universities and colleges listen to what students want. And so it's really empowering to be able to say, this is what I want to learn. So the first thing you can do is share with your educator details of the SDG Teach In. So Khadija in the chat box, and of course we'll be sharing all these links after with slides, so don't worry too much, but there is a comms pack that we've made for students as well, so students can take a look at different kinds of email templates, different kinds of graphics that they can send to their educator to promote the SDG Teach In and to get their educator to perhaps think about pledging. Share with your educator what you believe the SDGs, the relevant SDGs are to your learning. So have this conversation, start this conversation, what resonates with you, what resonates with your discipline as well. Try to embed reference topics related to the SDGs in your assignments. So really, even if you don't feel like the SDGs are embedded in your briefing in any of your syllabus, you can still embed the SDGs in your assignments. And then lastly, you can speak to your course or your program rep. So if you're in university or college, you can speak to your course or program rep about the SDG Teach In and about incorporating SDGs into your modules. So course and program reps are, they liaise, they're the sort of liaison between the students and the administration. And they play a really interesting and important role in communicating students' needs and wants, especially in relation to their course. So definitely work with your student rep to promote incorporating the SDGs into teaching and learning. And so I've been talking a lot about how formal curriculum is not the only space in education institutions and elsewhere where students and others can learn. We can also influence, these other learning spheres, which are the informal curriculum and the subliminal curriculum. So when you're pledging to take part in the SDG Teach In, definitely consider the different curricula that you contribute to at your institution or in your role. And so I'm just going to go through these 3 different types of curricula. Perhaps I'll make this interactive as well and ask everyone what they think each of the curricula entail. So in the chat box, if you'd like to share your thoughts, what do you feel the formal curriculum is? So something that is credit bearing, yeah, certainly. Something that has a formal instruction, yep. Courses and modules, syllabus teaching, learning outcomes and assignments, definitely. So having, those formal and defined learning outcomes and assessments to ensure that you're reaching those outcomes, definitely. Course books, assignments, exams, yeah. Yeah, so there's different sort of comments in there that highlight what the formal curriculum is. And yeah, so the formal curriculum is formal instruction, those assessments, requirements, courses or modules that students are required or learners are required to take in order to achieve a learning outcome, something which is assessed or examined, absolutely. And so the formal curriculum certainly is an interesting place where you can embed the SDGs and take part in the SDG Teach In. And you can, embed the SDGs in the formal curriculum without redesigning the whole curriculum. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So what do you think the informal curriculum is? So a few comments coming in, conversations in the cafeteria. Interesting one, that's really interesting. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So something taken out with their courses, perhaps with other students or departments. So learning around your formal teaching, volunteering, chatting, yeah, after school, development education centers, youth work, campus activities, yeah, the culture of the university. Yeah, the inclusion of themes and messages within organization. So interesting. I'm kind of seeing a mix of formal and subliminal here. So informal and subliminal. So the informal curriculum is, and many of you have mentioned it's something that students, choose to do outside of their formal learning, or something that anyone chooses to do outside of formal learning. And so that could be extracurricular activities. It could be training programs that take place, perhaps, something you might do after work, educational workshops that might take place at a care home. All of that is the informal curriculum, and it's so important as well. It plays such an important role in supporting learners to understand sustainability and how they can contribute to sustainability. And so the subliminal curriculum, and so I've seen a lot of comments that actually cover what the subliminal curriculum is. So someone earlier on mentioned conversations in the cafeteria. There are a few comments about the culture of the university, inclusion of themes and messages within organizational culture. And so that is what the subliminal curriculum is. So the subliminal curriculum is the culture and the values that students or an individual might identify in their institutions, and this is what provides critical elements of the subliminal curriculum. So we like to call it learning by osmosis, essentially. So it's what you're exposed to that might influence your thinking or encourage you to think a certain way. It might encourage you to take some things seriously, some things not. Interesting examples are what your human resources department chooses to, their policies. So whether or not they encourage individuals to take the train as opposed to flying places, that's certainly part of the subliminal curriculum. Another example is perhaps what kind of recycling bins you have in your institution as well. So whether or not students and individuals are seeing the importance of recycling or the importance of reusing materials. Yeah, embedded racism and sexism, definitely. So the way that an institution might talk about or deal with racism and sexism, or the work they might do to support the end of racism and sexism, or to abolish racism and sexism, definitely. So these are the different kinds of the spheres of education: formal curriculum, informal curriculum, and subliminal curriculum. And I just wanted to go through all of this with you because I think it's so important, and they're all so important. And oftentimes the focus is on the formal curriculum, but the SDG Teach In and the SDGs can really be incorporated in all three of these spheres. And all three of these spheres are equally important in supporting people and supporting students and learners to feel like they can leave their institution or leave their workplace and contribute to a sustainable future and be responsible citizens. So yeah, have a think once you leave this webinar about what your role is and how you can maybe contribute or influence these three different curricula and what that might look like in terms of embedding the SDGs. So I guess less sort of high level, where can I incorporate the SDGs in my teaching, assessment, and training? So as I had mentioned previously, you certainly don't have to redesign any kind of curricula. You can think about case studies. Perhaps if you're working in law, you might want to use examples of labor injustice, or even really good examples of communities or organizations that have sued governments for not taking climate action. There's an interesting group called Pay to Pollute that I think recently sued the UK government for polluting, essentially. So these are interesting examples you can use, case studies you might want to discuss. You can incorporate the SDGs in debates in your classroom, in your lecture hall, debating and discussing how your discipline or areas within your discipline may contribute to certain SDGs, may progress certain SDGs, may impact maybe negatively certain SDGs as well, and how you might overcome that. You can have discussions. So even if it's end of the sort of lecture for the day, if you want to have a 10-minute discussion on what is your discipline's relationship with the environment. So one example I saw recently was a course asked their students a question, which is, what is your relationship with the environment? That they had to answer in photographs. And so that's just a really interesting a way to think about the SDGs and sustainability. group work as well, working groups, and that way you can really get, students can develop collaborative skills while also thinking about sustainability. Simulations, and I think, or stimulations rather, and I think the Spanish class example was a really good example of this. So using films, books, and plays. If you want to show a film in your class, perhaps you can show one that touches upon subjects related to the SDGs. And there's so many, because we know how broad the SDGs are and how they really do cover so many different challenges and topics in sustainability. Whether that's gender equality, climate action, poverty, well-being. And then also events. So we saw the example of the Keele Students Union putting on an event. So this is a really good way of incorporating the SDGs in education, or embedding SDGs in your work. Any kind of event, whether it directly talks about the SDGs or it talks about a topic related to the SDGs, those are also really good ways to incorporate the SDGs. And lastly, I also want to kind of share this slide, because I feel like it might be helpful to think about the end goal, the outcome of individuals and students engaging with the SDGs, and that's sustainability skills. So through incorporating the SDGs in education, staff, students, adults, anyone really can develop these particular skills. And they're really useful skills in being able to contribute and realize a sustainable future. So these skills include being able to understand, the causes of inequality in the world, thinking critically about information presented, understanding how to create change. Oftentimes, it's just difficult to understand the first step you need to take in general. Planning for the long term as well as the short term, challenging the status quo, challenging business as usual, understanding how to use resources efficiently to limit the impact on the environment and other people, being able to communicate complex information. So these are a range of tangible sustainability skills that we at SOS-UK believe students and everyone should be able to develop. And the SDG Teach In, or incorporating the SDGs, surely can help with that. And of course, it's not just about 2 weeks of the campaign. It's lifelong learning to be able to develop these skills, but it's a really good starting point. So yeah, in case it's helpful to sort of think about the bigger picture and the end goal, perhaps thinking about it in terms of the skills students will develop is helpful. Okay, so what can I do next? So you can pledge to take part in the SDG Teach In. So as I had mentioned, the SDG Teach In will take place February 21st to March 4th. And I just want to highlight as well, you can pledge to take part even if you're already incorporating the SDGs in your teaching and learning. We want to create a global community of people talking about this and people excited about embedding sustainability in learning. So please do join us even if you're already doing this. You're more than welcome. You can encourage your colleagues to take part. So once you've pledged, there's many different ways to encourage your colleagues to take part. So we have a comms pack, a general comms pack with email templates and graphics that you can use to email different networks you might be a part of. We have a few graphics that you can post on Twitter. You can put the SDG Teach In your email signature. We have all sorts of stuff for you in the general comms pack. And do get in touch with us if you need anything sort of tailored. And yeah, in terms of encouraging your colleagues to take part, again, we sort of mentioned our leaderboard. So we will be sharing now every week leaders in terms of institutions who have the most number of educators pledged or reaching the highest percentage of their student body. So your institution can be up there. And again, it's add some friendly competition, keeps us on our toes, makes things a bit fun. And it's about celebrating as well. It's about celebrating everyone who's taking part, because it is really a brilliant and important thing to do. And then the last thing is share your experience for a case study. So at the end of the 2-week campaign, we will send over a short questionnaire to get some feedback on your experience. And we'll also provide you with a template to support you to share a case study. So whether that's you putting on an event on gender inequality in the making of modern China, if you're a history lecturer, anything really, you can just share what you've done in your case study, whether it's a discussion you had at the end of one of your lectures, whether it's a film that you showed your students, anything really. And just on that, I'd like to highlight again, I had mentioned that the SDG Teach In is a good entry point because it's not very bureaucratic. So really all you have to do at this point is pledge to take part, think about what you'd like to do, and then at the end we'll send over a questionnaire and a case study template. So there's no sort of other paperwork that you need to fill out or worry about. We really want to make this as accessible as possible. We also have a resource page on our website with a range of different resources about embedding sustainability in teaching and learning that we will link as well into the chat box. And yeah, and what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, and I'll be sharing these slides and this video as well. Brilliant. So there's around 15 minutes left, and I wanted to leave some time just for everyone to share what they think they might want to do as part of the SDG Teach In, and to also just share any questions you might have. It's a big group of us, so I'm sure there's lots of different experiences and opinions in the room. So yeah, any questions or anyone want to speak on what they are planning on doing? And feel free to unmute yourself as well if you'd like to, if you prefer to speak instead of type. Anyone want to? There's no wrong or right answer. Yeah, so Marianne, really good question. How can unions get involved in the teach-in other than encouraging the university and the academics? Yeah, so earlier on I shared an example of Keele University Students Union, and they essentially put on an event at their students union about the SDGs and how the SDGs are so important for social justice. So unions are an amazing place for learning. Students learn so much in terms of the informal curriculum and even the subliminal curriculum, you know, that learning through the culture. So absolutely putting on an event, perhaps maybe a webinar, showing a film even at your union. Those are different ways that you can embed the SDGs and get students thinking and talking about the SDGs. So do you want academics who are already teaching it to pledge as well as new ones? Yeah, so we very much want academics, anyone who's really thinking about it and talking about it and embedding it in their teaching, because as I had mentioned, we want to you know, create a global community of educators who are thinking and actually embedding sustainability in their teaching and learning. So yeah, if you pledged last year and you've continued to incorporate the SDGs in your teaching and learning, absolutely, please do pledge again and be a part of the global initiative. Yeah, so educators of any level, any discipline, whether that's formal education, informal education, can take part. So that means primary educators, nursery educators, educators in care homes, you know, union CPD trainers, anyone. So an example of, yeah, so Leona said, I teach security studies. So oh, sorry, I'm struggling to read the chat. So we'll incorporate this in weekly teaching. For example, challenge students to find ways that realist thought can include sustainability without compromising principles. Yeah, so that's a debate you certainly can have. How does your discipline, you know, progress or impact sustainability? Certainly. Annette has said, I'm interested in teaching examples. Interested in examples of learning and teaching strategies which have incorporated sustainable curriculum in HE arts and media departments. Yeah, and so really good question. And we, I can follow up with you offline because I can't think of the exact examples at the moment. But there are definitely examples. Sorry, I can't explain at the moment. Any other sort of comments or thoughts, questions? Okay, so I'm a teacher trying to get the language of sustainability into a more oh, common parlance at my school, both in the academic and formal sphere. Yeah, so any ideas for Phil as well in his query would be, anyone can speak. Anyone have anything for Phil? So we can link you to the resource page as well, Phil, which has lots of different examples of embedding sustainability in primary and secondary curriculum. So I'll be able to do that in a moment. Great. Yeah, good question. So is there any way of finding out which educators have decided to take part, or is it up to them to share? So it's up to the educator, the individual educator, to share. But as I mentioned, we're going to start weekly leaderboards now going forward. So you'll be able to know what institutions have the highest number of educators pledged, or the highest percentage of their student body reached through the SDG Teach In. But we won't be sort of highlighting individual educators. So we do have email signatures and Twitter templates that we can share. So some educators might choose to put on their email template that they've pledged to take part, or they might choose to tweet about it. But it's not something that we will absolutely not expect anyone to do that as part of the campaign. So someone said we have the SDGs up everywhere in school. They're very colorful. The teachers refer to them often. Yeah, so it goes back to that idea of the SDGs being that shared language. We really see them everywhere in every sector, and they're so accessible to people of all ages because they look good. I don't know who did the branding for them, but they look brilliant. They're so eye-catching and they're so easy to sort of play around with. So that's another benefit of the SDGs. They just really do look quite good. And yeah, so I had never thought about that in terms of younger students and pupils engaging with them because of how colorful they are. So there's a few comments in the chat box about different methodologies. So John has asked, would it be possible to use this presentation to promote interest in the teach-in? Absolutely, John. So I will share these slides, I will share this presentation, and I will also make a shortened version of the slides so that you can, like a sort of more simple slide deck, I suppose. So you can absolutely share that. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone who has been in attendance. So Mary has said, any pointers for early years? My organization manages nurseries. Yeah, so again, I wonder if there's something there perhaps about well-being and good health, because I know that's a big thing at that age. Teaching toddlers essentially to be active and take care of themselves. Maybe that's an SDG that might be relevant. Again, I'd recommend taking some time thinking about what SDGs are relevant to your work, thinking about what's going to be happening between those 2 weeks, Feb 21st to March 4th, and then trying to embed those SDGs into what might be happening at your place of work or your institution. So if you have maybe an outdoor activity, you can talk about the importance of well-being for everyone, perhaps something like that. So yeah, those are the 3 simple steps I would take. First, thinking about the SDGs that are relevant, thinking about what's actually happening, taking place between the 2 weeks, and then thinking about how to embed the SDGs in those activities. So someone's asked if there's a space where we can share resources. I have stuff for nursery, lower primary. Amazing. Yeah. If you don't mind, so we have this resource page online. So if you'd like to email us, we can actually put it on the resource page. And I'm sure that would be greatly helpful to lots of individuals out there across the world. So yeah, please do. I'll put my email in the chat, but you could also email SOS-UK or my colleague Khadija. Yeah, Jenny, no worries at all. So we've made sure to record the video will be a resource that anyone can use and access, and we'll also be sharing the slides. Yeah, thank you all so much. And if anyone has any other questions, I'll stay online for a couple more minutes. But yeah, good luck and thank you all so much for coming out. This really is a global initiative. So I do feel like we're going to be part of something, you know, that's not just UK based, and that's doing really meaningful and tangible work. Thanks, everyone. I'm so glad to hear that, John. I'm really happy to hear that. Brilliant. And of course, just do send us an email for any questions you may have. We're more than happy to help. Thanks, everyone.